So we're going to talk a little bit about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali that we spoke about. So the very old book that describes 8 steps to meditation. So this is going to be really useful. You will find that what he explains is explained also in Buddhism, in Taoism, in different ways. This is just one of the methods we could use to achieve the same thing. It is a very nicely explained method. It's in a way very straightforward, although the book goes very in depth on all the subtleties of the practice. And it's going to be really useful to understand what is described in here, to understand why we are doing this practice in the morning. And we're going to do meditations this week that are unguided. So what I'm going to share now is going to be really important for the unguided meditations. So basically, what the first 4 sentences in Sanskrit, they are called sutras. Little concise statements, because it was very old, so he kept it very concise. He made little statements, and they need some unpacking verbally, but the first 4 statements kind of explain the whole book, the whole idea. They're very famous, by the way, also. I'm just going to shortly read them to you. What he tells you about yoga, what it is there to do. He says, Atha Yoga Nushasanam, which means now the teachings of yoga begin. Yoga is Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha, which means yoga is the restraint of the fluctuations of mind. Sometimes this is understood as it is the stilling of the mind, but that could easily lead to confusion about what this practice is actually about, because we don't need to have a completely still mind. So we're going to dive into that, what that means. He says, by restraining the fluctuations of mind, in the 3rd sutra, then the seer, your true self, abides in itself. The deeper part of you becomes kind of aware of itself. And 4, in other moments, the seer is entangled in the objects of experience. So basically what he is saying is most of the time, all of us are entangled by objects of our mind, by desires, by thoughts, by ideas about the future, by concepts, by good things happening, bad things happening. And so we're constantly stuck in entanglement. And he tries to help us use our attention of mind in a different way, so that these things might still continue to happen, but we do not get entangled. And that basically is the process of finding that which is giving attention and kind of looking back at that which is giving attention. So yoga, the word yoga means uniting. So you were kind of trying to unite the seer with itself and live from that place. And that can sound quite mystical, but it's actually quite straightforward. When we have a little moment where we are not busy with the mind, there's some kind of clarity. And if you've ever meditated, you've had that experience. Then when thoughts come back, you can kind of laugh at your own thought. Like maybe something disturbs you, or something bothers you, and you kind of laugh at yourself being bothered. So you look from a deeper place. So yoga is kind of the method to abide much more constantly in the deeper place, which can only lead to good things, basically, when we are not entangled by everything our mind thinks, which is conditioned. So he describes 8 steps. I'm going to write them down. They're called Ashtanga. This is not to be confused with the modern Ashtanga yoga, which is the very rigorous movement practice. Ashtanga is 8 limbs of the Yoga Sutras to meditation originally. So like 8 limbs of a body. So the first 2 he describes are yama and niyama. And we're going to dive into them more later. They are commitments to ourselves internally and commitments to others. And so, but this is different than what we maybe have learned in the West from a church or something telling you what to do with a finger and telling you you'll go to hell. It's more, you have to more see it like, because he talks about things like not being greedy, not stealing, not lying, being content, trusting life. But if we are not entangled by the mind and the desires of the mind, then we won't feel the need to steal, or we won't feel the need to lie or to manipulate anything about life. So instead of waiting for us to come to the realizations that we don't need to do all those things, by the end, he kind of starts with them. So we can already start cultivating the qualities that we would naturally get to anyways, if we would start to meditate. So all the principles of love and unity, basically. So yama and niyama, inner and outer constraints and commitments. Then asana, which is posture, and pranayama, which is control of breath and control of energy. So asana basically means how we sit. If we want to learn to meditate, we want to sit upright. This can help the body. We use asana to open the body, to open the hips, to open all the places where we are constricted. Come more on that later. And pranayama. So what he describes with breath control, we control the breath. We learn how to control the breath because we've often been so disturbed, and like we all know, like many people are really disturbed in this world, right? Like many people are stressed, anxious, depressed. And what happens, that comes from how we think and what we've been conditioned with and what we've been traumatized with. And what that does, that creates a change in how we breathe and how we also sit. Like someone that has had their heart closed for a long time, their heart will physically literally close. Someone that is very stressed all the time, they will breathe all the time like this. Or they won't be able to relax their diaphragm. And they might have been doing like that for like decades. So he describes that. And so we work, we don't wait for meditation to bring us that, because it's kind of like a two-way traffic between the mind and consciousness and the body. So we actively begin to relax the body, open the breath, and allow that to have an effect on the mind too. So we basically, if we would be fully enlightened, our breath and our body would be very relaxed. But before we are enlightened, we can already relax our body and our breath, and it will be a huge benefit. So we are working a lot this month with using techniques to do that. So yama, niyama, asana, pranayama. Then he goes on to describe the more subtle elements of actually meditation. Pratyahara, which is the withdrawal of the senses from sound, from sight. So it's meaning to close our eyes, it's meaning to be in a quiet room. But it can also mean, in a more broader context of our lives, to be a bit more mindful about what we consume in terms of media, right? If we are watching disturbing images of Gaza before a meditation, it might not be the right thing to do straight away in the morning. So it's being mindful of what we take in through the senses, sense control, basically. Pratyahara. Then the sixth limb he describes is dharana. So when we do breath awareness, that is dharana. Dharana means one-pointed focus. And how I always like to describe it is like if you would try to depict the movements of the mind with the hands, it's like it goes in all directions, right? Like a thought here, an interesting thing there. It's constantly pulled in all the directions. And dharana is to practice to bring the mind back into a more one-pointed state where it's less easily, at least, swayed left and right. So sometimes what would be not a helpful way to understand this sutra is to think that you have to be able to hold your concentration at one point for endless hours at a time, because you will become again very tense and rigid and you won't really get there. But if you can improve how much the mind moves, it can become at least a little bit more still. It will be super helpful with many things in life. And in this case, to progress to a more subtle stage. Because dharana means focus. So when we do breath awareness, that is focus, but is actually not yet what Patanjali calls dhyana, meditation. So we use breath awareness as an instrument to meditation. But breath awareness itself is not necessarily meditation. Dhyana is where it becomes more effortless, where we are, where the one-pointedness is more settled. And this can happen even in the matter of a few minutes by using our breath. I'm not talking here about something that has to last years of practice. Just a few minutes of settling the mind can help to make the mind more naturally meditative. And it's in a way almost strange to talk about these last 3 steps as like, like the mind likes to think in things of like being very boxed. Okay, so I move from one-pointed focus to meditation to last step samadhi. But they are all very subtle, very similar states, and you will find amazingly defined descriptions of even different states of samadhi. But you have to understand that this is all, like very with each other. It's not very separate. So samadhi, many people give many different definitions of it. One way you could define it, how I at this point understand it, but maybe I'm not explaining Patanjali correctly. He wrote it down. But how I understand it is where we are simply at the highest level of practice, where the abiding of consciousness in itself, where the not being entangled by disturbing thoughts, where that has been completely settled. So where we just live that and nothing breaks that anymore. So that's a very high state. And you could also say that if you have never had an experience of tasting this true nature that Patanjali speaks of, then the first time you have that experience of your true nature, of awareness becoming aware of itself, you could say that is a moment of samadhi. You realized what you are. It's a lot of this process is also often practiced by doing it in a cave by yourself, and by kind of meditating for a long time to get a brief, maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour, but to get this brief, very strong experience of awareness becoming aware of itself. And that one moment where it happens will shift something for the rest of your life, because you've realized something. You've realized something and you can never unsee it. You might forget it temporarily when the ego comes back, but that realization will be so strong that you will always be trying to return to it. So that was I believe one of his main objectives to get people to see it at least once, because that one time it will echo onward and forward forever. Does anyone have any questions so far?
I understand when all these thoughts come from right and left field, and how we try to bring them back with our breath. However, there seems to be that story, that narrative kind of churning away. So even if you can get alert, you want to go to that story, and that story a lot of times is not a positive story. How can we pull ourselves from that churning away of that story that we create?
Yeah. Continuous exposure to this method in probably environments that gonna be supportive of you staying just with the simple method of like trying to come back to the breath. In the beginning, it's very common that you just feel like it's not working at all, but that's part of why this path is also in a way it has an element of very immediately waking up from your mind, and at the same time it's very progressive. Like we have to stay with these things for long periods of time. If you go to longer retreats, especially if you would go to more like places like monasteries where it's all a bit more rigid, fierce. If you would go there to one of the teachers and you would tell them a story about like everything you're going for, it's day 5 and you just go completely nuts inside yourself, they would just probably just look at you with a slow gaze and would tell you, just do the method. and then when we keep on doing it, at some point things naturally start happening. Yeah. Sometimes we have to go through the process of slowly realizing all the ways in which we then try to use our attention that don't work. No one can really tell us that. Because when we try to hold on to the breath, and that's a very common movement in the beginning, we try to put the mind away and that doesn't help. And then at some point we find that relaxing a bit more helps. It kind of has to come just by experience. It's these parts that we cannot learn from books or from someone telling us. So a short answer would be to just continue practice and to trust that it will come, because these methods do work. Yeah. Sometimes when we ask questions to guides or teachers, it's often very funny if we would ask that exact same question to ourselves at that moment. Just someone sitting there, it's like a mirror. Actually, we are asking that to ourselves already. Yeah. Okay. So, because we have a month together, we can really work nicely with the stages of this process. I have to say at the same time, when I say stages, this is sometimes people understand it that you go from the first niyama to the second and the third and the fifth, but it's actually all at the same time. It's not like something that you go through step by step. But one thing that we can take one step at a time is moving from concentration practices to more natural meditation. So traditionally at every innate, this is like number 4 I'm doing, we've been doing the first week of pure concentration practice. And it's boring sometimes, it's hard work, but it's worth it. And then in the next week we will see what has happened with practicing our concentration a bit more intensely. And so the simple method of breath awareness is very useful for that. And I want to give you a few more methods that might work better for you, but they're all concentration methods. So to keep the energy a bit flowing, let's take a deep breath together.